Leah, what's that smell? Is that you? Do you smell that too? It's the smell of desperation. We've all been in this game long enough to know that Meghan conveniently slips under the radar when things aren't going too well for her and Harry. And we all knew that come coronation time, she would rear her heavily bronzed head again, Cheshire cat and all, and along with her equally desperate husband, try in vain to derail and overshadow the happiness and excitement surrounding the upcoming coronation. Because nothing screams, "I'm back," as making a couple of back-to-back appearances, high-profile appearances, all of which were conveniently timed to take place just over a week or so before the coronation. And of course, nothing screams, "We're floating in a cloud of marital bliss," as much as awkwardly turning down your husband when he leans in for a kiss. Yikes. Meanwhile, while this display was happening, across the Atlantic, Prince William was up at dawn for the annual Anzac Dawn service. Looking dashing as ever, might I add, the epitome of living a life of service versus whatever you call this. And so much for we want our privacy, huh? Because I don't live in LA, but I think we all know that a Lakers game in LA where the likes of the Kardashians were attending is not where you're gonna find your privacy. I don't know if they figured that one out yet, but they're a bit slow, so let's give them some time. But considering everything that's happened in the past week alone, if there is one word I could use to describe Meghan and Harry, it's desperate. Or predictable. Predictably desperate. It all started off with the leaked letters, the exchange that took place between Meghan and King Charles in the aftermath of the Oprah interview. Now, we've already discussed that topic at length during this week's podcast, which thank you so much for tuning in if you have. If you haven't, please check it out. But for those of you who haven't, the discussion was about, as I'm sure you all know by now, the Telegraph, which always seems to have an exclusive scoop about Meghan and Harry, leaking the contents of private letters between the King and Meghan about the racism allegations, in which Meghan and the King both agreed that there was no malice intended behind the questions about, what are the kids gonna look like? Now, a lot was said from my part and the part of my co-host Zach on this topic in the podcast, but what I will say today is that whoever leaked those letters to the Telegraph, because it's gonna have to be either Meghan Markle or the King, and I think we're all leaning towards, one party more than the other, but whoever did it didn't think it through carefully. Because what ended up happening was, rather than overshadow the coronation and reignite the racism allegations and cast a negative light on the royal family, what it actually did was expose Meghan once again, because this isn't the first time it's happened, for the duplicitous dispenser of misinformation that she is. Because they only confirm one thing, that at the time of that interview, as she sat there and made those allegations, she knew, as she admitted in the letter between her and King Charles, that the comments about Archie's skin color were made without malice. The leaks also confirm that she never thought the royal family was racist. She wanted to talk about unconscious bias. Sound familiar? The same term that Harry used for the first time ever in his interview earlier this year with Tom Bradby after he and his wife accepted the Ripple of Hope Award for standing up against racism in the British monarchy, not unconscious bias. So they never bothered to correct the record for 2 years. They let Prince Philip and the Queen die with that allegation looming over their heads, and only now have they backtracked. So all this leak has done is confirm that the royal family is indeed not racist, Are you listening, disciples of Meghan and Harry? Your masters have said it themselves on 2 separate occasions now. And that Meghan and Harry deliberately conveyed that false narrative during the Oprah interview while they knew that millions would tune in to watch. Why? We can only guess. To destroy the royal family for not giving in to their every whim. Now, given the Telegraph's cozy relationship with the Sussexes, as evidenced by getting exclusive access to the first extracts from Harry's book, and even getting access to their homes apparently, which is how we learned that they have a monogrammed doormat. But the logical conclusion, considering all of this evidence, is that these leaks were most likely, I can't say certainly, orchestrated by Meghan and Harry, or at least Meghan. However, something quite interesting has taken place recently, or I should say it would be interesting if it weren't so darn repetitive. According to investigative journalist and author of Courtiers, another book I own, which I do recommend, legal letters have been sent to the Telegraph from both the Sussex camp and the royal family over the article which leaked the contents of these letters. Now, of course, this has the effect of making it look like Meghan and Harry had absolutely nothing to do with these leaks, and that they were so furious over it that they involved their lawyers. But for those who have been following the shenanigans of these two for a while, as I have been, this news brought about an incredibly potent sense of déjà vu. I invite you to cast your minds back to the high-profile case surrounding Meghan's letter to her father, notoriously now dubbed as the Dear Daddy letter. 2 things stand out to me about that case that seem eerily familiar to this particular leak. First, the extreme lengths that Meghan went to not only keep the identity of the 5 friends who, supposedly reached out to People magazine all by themselves without her knowledge or authority, and first revealed the existence and contents of the letter, but she also tried desperately hard and succeeded in preventing the case from going to trial and stopping it at a summary judgment. Now, as I said, her friends alleged that she had nothing to do with the leaking of that letter. However, given the later findings that we learned as the case went to appeal, I believe we have plenty of reason to doubt Meghan's version of events, because after all, there was that unfortunate lapse of memory that the court pointed out once Jason Kanoff became involved. Which leads me to my second point. Her and Harry and Omid Scobie's indignant denials of Meghan and Harry's involvement in writing Finding Freedom. As we all know by now, thanks to Jason Kanoff, they indeed had a lot to do with the writing of Finding Freedom. And we also know that they went to extreme lengths to keep this fact a secret. Which is why I believe that Meghan tried so hard to fight for a summary judgment, to keep the case from going to trial, which would have a discovery process, and which would put her in the witness stand subject to cross-examination, which would have revealed everything that Jason Kanoff later revealed anyway, if not more. So, considering all of the above, and considering the famous saying of past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, would it really be that far-fetched to arrive at the logical and, in my opinion, plausible conclusion that Meghan sicked her lawyers on the Telegraph simply to mislead us and destroy the trail that possibly led all the way back to her? After all, she's previously thrown her own family, her own flesh and blood, under the bus to save her own skin and to make herself look good. So why wouldn't she do that to some random publication? I mean, it's not like she hadn't done it before. She did it to The Cut, where, once again, something she thought would bolster her profile only ended up backfiring spectacularly against her. And so a couple of months later, in her Variety magazine interview, she essentially stated that she was too open and too trustworthy with the reporter that The Cut sent, and they took advantage of her and twisted everything she said and turned it into a hit piece, essentially. Which is ironic, given that it was that very interview in which we learned that Meghan talks as though there is a bachelor producer in her head directing her on what to say. These aren't exactly the traits of a naive and gullible and trusting to a fault 41-year-old ingenue who was so cruelly taken advantage of by a minor publication such as The Cut. Please, she could have killed that interview if she didn't want it to go out. She's controlling, we've all heard it, she said it herself.
I was really hands-on with the creative process. I think anything I get involved with, I kind of get very invested in it, so it has my name on it.
She needs to be involved in every process, every step of the way of every project she's involved with, anything she gives her name to. There is no way they publish that article without her prior approval. But she backtracked when it backfired. So I think that's what's happening here, once again with the leaks, even though she sent her lawyers after them. In my opinion, it's just a game. And if you want to be further convinced, just take a look at this latest article that The Telegraph published about Meghan's new look. The Duchess of Sussex's newly straightened and lightened hairstyle is a polished power move. Really? This? About a self-proclaimed feminist? This? About a woman who openly and notoriously attacked one of her earliest employers, Deal or No Deal, because she thought she was much more than just her looks? Forgive me if I'm mistaken, but I thought feminism was about equality and moving away from the old patriarchal notion of reducing a woman to her appearance and nothing else. And if I'm not mistaken, if that is still the case, then someone please explain to me why The Telegraph, apparently voted the UK's best news website of the year, has an entire article, a lengthy one at that, purely dedicated to Meghan's straight hair being a power move. And if you thought the headline was bad, wait till you get a whiff of what's contained in the body of the article. It's nauseating. You'll come across dribbles such as, her skin looks glowing, youthful, and immaculate. I mean, she's a beautiful woman, don't get me wrong. But for starters, this look specifically, which she donned, as part of her appearance for the TED Talk introduction for one of her photographer friends, is actually pretty scary. I mean, it makes her out to look like some AI rendition of herself. And as I read through all the gushing that littered this article, I couldn't help but be reminded of the way in which Meghan was described in Harry's book. The multiple references to youth and the emphasis on her ethereal beauty, out of this world beauty, just makes me think that unless The Telegraph is employing the same ghostwriter, there seems to be a manual that journalists and writers operate out of when it comes to describing Meghan Markle. To end off this segment, if this is what the UK news website of the year thinks is headline news and worthy of a lengthy article, then yikes. Now, speaking of the multiple inconsistencies that arise out of Meghan and Harry, there's more. Yep, they're just the gift that keeps on giving. And this time it's in the courtroom, and Harry is doing a very good job of following in his wife's footsteps. A senior judge presiding over his latest phone hacking case against NGN has expressed concerns over factual inconsistencies in Harry's complaint and his latest witness statement. Now, this is all relevant to the statute of limitations, which I have mentioned before in a video that I've made on this case, because normally there's a 6-year time limit during which a plaintiff can take action against a defendant for a tort. So invasion of privacy being one of them, for example. And in this case, that time period appears to have lapsed. Now, Harry is arguing that Section 32 of the Limitations Act should kick in, which would delay the statute of limitations because of fraud or a mistake or concealment committed by the defendant. There's a problem here. Harry's alleging that his family did all the hiding, all the concealing of facts and evidence so that he wouldn't take this case to court, not NGN. So just based on a precursory, glance at the statute, I don't know how he's going to successfully argue his way around that. Now, aside from that, Harry is once again, casting blame on his family in the lead up to the coronation, which admittedly, it's not really up to him to schedule these high court hearings. Although I will say that as Prince of the UK, he could have put in a request of, hey, can we please delay this to after the coronation maybe, because there are some explosive things I'm saying in there against my family. But of course he didn't do that, because isn't that their whole MO at this point? Saying explosive things to cast a negative light on their family. But here we see the same explosive allegations reemerge in a witness statement. He accuses his father Charles of intervening when the Queen was gung-ho about suing NGN. So once again, as he did in his book and the Netflix docuseries, he made the Queen look like this hapless old lady who was being controlled and undermined by those beneath her, which couldn't be further from the truth. Talk about feminism, right? But even more so, he's reinforcing the allegation that the King and Queen Camilla purposely did this. They purposely stopped Harry from seeking justice so that the media would stay on their good side in the lead up to the coronation, so that they'd get positive coverage once they became king and queen consort. So again, accusing them of throwing him under the bus for their own benefit, which to me spells projection. But what's more, as I mentioned earlier, is that he can't seem to keep his story straight, an issue that has not gone unnoticed by the judge. All I can say is about that, Your Honor, get used to it. So on the one hand, we have Harry claiming that he had no idea about the phone hacking scandal until 2019, which is the year that he took this case to court. But then we have a different version from Harry himself, in which he claims that he didn't know about the scandal until 2012. So there's a 7-year discrepancy here. And that the only reason he didn't take action earlier was because of a secret deal which involved William and NGN, in which they agreed in an out-of-court settlement that William would be paid $1 million in compensation for the hacking. Now, mind you, William ended up donating every single penny of those £1 million to charity, and not any charity. Reports state that in 2020, William made a £1 million donation to the Invictus Games. So if that doesn't tell you the depths of Harry's hatred and jealousy and anger directed at his brother, I don't know what does. And he's making it out like an out-of-court settlement is a bad thing. Let me tell you, as a lawyer, it's completely normal. In fact, in many cases, it's encouraged. Courts like it when cases can be resolved outside of court so that you can free up their time and resources for other more pressing cases. Regardless, we have a 7-year discrepancy here, and that's problematic. So which is it, Harry? Was it 2019 or was it 2012? And mind you, reports also state that William told Harry about the phone hacking to begin with, because his phone and Catherine's phones were hacked. I truly believe that if William was going to get a settlement, Harry was going to get one too. And in fact, that is what reports are stating. But Harry turned it down in 2019 when he went rogue, the term they actually used to describe him, after, you guessed it, Meghan Markle joined the picture. Whatever the case is, because this is getting very messy, very confusing, there are multiple cases against multiple defendants for phone hacking at this point, one thing is clear. This is yet another classic example of Meghan and Harry's nefarious plans backfiring spectacularly in their faces. Because in what was clearly an attempt to yet again throw shade at his family and make really vicious, baseless accusations against them without any evidence, it only ended up in a judge effectively calling Harry out, as the Court of Appeal called Meghan out, as being dishonest people who can't keep their stories straight if their lives depended on it. In this week's podcast, we talked about Meghan's statement that was released in response to allegations that she wasn't going to the coronation because of the contents of the leaked letters between her and King Charles, the racism. So she called the notion ridiculous and urged the media to stop digging up the past, stop creating this circus, and just do as she does. Live in the present. Which was very promptly dubbed as Joke of the Month. I've already said my piece about how laughable of a statement, this was in this week's podcast. But for a woman who's made a career out of digging up the past over and over again? The hypocrisy and the irony is almost too much to even contemplate. How about this, Meghan? Aside from practicing what you preach yourself, how about you go along to your husband, who seems to actually really seriously and painfully and tragically be stuck in his own past, in his own hell, which you have helped dig him back into, and tell him, help him to let go, stop digging it up, and just live in the present as you do. Isn't that what a loving and supportive wife would do, rather than just sit there and let her husband wallow in his own hell? Because these witness statements of his in relation to this new court case really indicate that as much as he'd like to tell us he's in a better place, he's done the work, he's gone through therapy, he's able to feel and let go, none of that seems to be true. Because even in this witness statement, he brings up the death of his mother and somehow tries to link it to his current phone hacking case by accusing these journalists of having blood on their hands. It's time they saw justice. Those, unfortunately, are not the words of someone who has seemingly moved on. He's more isolated than ever. Even Princess Eugenie, once his only lifeline to the royal family, has apparently dropped him. Sussex arch nemesis Piers Morgan, who recently met up with Eugenie and Beatrice at a pub over last weekend, I believe, essentially confirms this.
I was with some members of the royal family at the weekend, actually, just to shamelessly name drop for you. And I got to say, the temperature towards Harry is very, very chilly.
So, Meghan, how about you keep your vitriolic and hypocritical statements to yourself and look after your own before suggesting what the media and the press and the public should and shouldn't do? Because of all people, I think you're the last person who could be telling anyone how to correctly live their lives and enjoy the moment. There are talks that the king should rescind Harry's invitation to the coronation, which I seriously doubt will happen at this point. I think it's too late in the game, and perhaps, Harry should just show up, and maybe then he'll be put in his place publicly in front of millions to watch, which would include his wife watching from her make-believe palace in Montecito. And hopefully, once the coronation is over, the king can finally start showing Harry and Meghan, whenever they act up, what it actually means to be king. Whew, this was a long one. I think I'm just gonna go mute for the rest of the day. I've been talking for a long time. Bye.